Hello. Hello, good people. Hello, how are you doing today, Nicholas?
I'm doing pretty well. We were chatting offline. It's a busy day for us both, it seems.
Yes. Well, it's a busy month. It's like July. I keep talking about September today. July is just a busy month, and we're at the end of it. And we both have been taking on a bunch of new stuff, and we're adding it to our like already busy schedules. And it's been one of those months. So I'm looking forward to talking about selenite because I need some selenite energy in my life today. So I'm very stoked to talk to you about selenite. But before we get there, I have to tell you. So I just signed my contract for my seventh book, which I'm super excited about writing, and Llewellyn is really excited about working with me on it. So it's just a lot of good energy right now, right? And so I started thinking about the writing process, and I started thinking about how you are somebody which you're like on what, book 11 now or something like that?
Something like that. It's complicated.
Yeah. So what do you do? Because I keep getting asked all these questions about like, how do you write a book? How do you do the thing? And for me, I'm like, oh, I don't even know where to start with this process. So what's your writing process like? Because you have like 11 books out. So like, what is that like for you? And is there any advice that you can share with the masses about this today?
Yeah, so I get asked this a lot, and I always come down to like really boring things. And the first one is like show up for your writing. Show up regularly. And you get to choose what regular is. It's like when we talk about regular spiritual practice, it doesn't mean every day. Once a year is technically regular, but show up in a way that has the capacity to meet the goals that you want. Pick attainable goals. Pick goals that there are days it's going to feel like a struggle, but you know you can do it even when it is a struggle. And then pick goals that, other days you're going to smash it out of the park. So, for example, on my writing days, and not every day is designated writing day, my goal is 1,500 words. And there are some days where I can do 3 or 4 times that without blinking an eye. And there are other days like I'm 212 words in and I'm like, I'm never going to make it. I'm just not going to make it. But you keep going towards it no matter what. And the last one, the one that always makes a difference, I can tell when I'm doing this effectively, when I'm not, is have an outline. And I know that sounds like so high school English class, writing a paper 101, but it really is, especially for a brain like mine, which is somewhere in that kind of neurospicy territory. Um, it is really useful for me to have that underlying infrastructure so I can come back and see how things fit together. And I
Mhm.
often outline in two forms. I have the big outline, which is usually pretty vague. It starts out really, really messy, and then I pare it back until it begins to look like a table of contents. And then I do an in-depth outline for every chapter.
Mm.
And sometimes I do this more effectively than others, but having that clean outline so I can see the whole arc of the book is really necessary for me to have it just at a glance on one page or more. And then the
Mhm.
the messy chapter outlines are great because then I can scribble and cross out and draw arrows for where things really ought to go, or crumple it
Yeah.
up and start all over again.
Yeah. Yeah. I am not I traditionally I am a pantser, which is a problem. And so for those of you who don't know, in the writing world, we've got pantsers and plotters. And I am traditionally a let's just sit down and write kind of guy, which is a problem. Because then I end up with these huge manuscripts that I have to just like chop up into pieces like a salad. And that's very sad. Um, and as I've gotten better and realized like, oh no, I really do need an outline. First of all, you can't get published without an outline, so you need one of those. That's a thing. And so getting into publishing in general, that's been like, nope, you got to fix this thing that you don't like to do. um, but it's also good because the books always end up better. They just do, like, everything just flows better, it's more polished, so on and so forth. But so I've gotten to the point where I do a lot of plotting, and then I do my pants thing. So I'll figure out what my skeleton is for, whatever the document is, whatever the project is, and then I just sit down and start filling in the blanks. And that tends to be very helpful for me to get all of my, like, I want to get these things in the book, kind of out on paper. Those ideas I can see, I can read them, I can move through them. And then we go through and do the other things that I tend not to enjoy so much when it comes to writing a book. For example, the all of the like the minutia, the like the stuff that you what we okay. I'm just gonna play it because both of us have to do it because of the type of stuff that we write. But we end up writing a lot of like encyclopedia things, especially you. So for me, that stuff is like I'd rather pull my eyes out than do a book report, and that stuff starts to feel like a book report. So it's harder for me to get through that stuff than it is if it was like, oh, what are your thoughts on XYZ? So I try to get all of my thoughts out, and then I fill in with the stuff that I know I need for like background, so on and so forth. And it works, I mean, it does. But when I write fiction, totally different experience, totally different. I definitely have to have an outline and so on and so forth. So it depends on who you are as a person, and it depends on like what your project is, and as you said, kind of like what's your brain doing, because we really do all work differently upstairs, and so trying to fit into everyone else's like model for writing is like it just doesn't work for me. So I had to figure out my own way of doing it, which is good. What stones do you like to use when you're working on a book?
Mm. Well, because I write mostly about stones, there are two ways I'm going to answer this in true
Mhm.
Nicholas fashion. One is the stones I'm writing, obviously. If I'm writing a chapter about emerald, I'm going to be working with emerald because I need to be immersed in that energy, immersed in that space, that heart space, so I can hold that effectively for my readers to tap in. And, in something like the little pocket encyclopedia, there's 450 crystals in there. That there was no point in the writing of that book where all 450 were on my desk. I doubt there were even all 450 in the same room, because that would be far more organized than I really am behind the scenes. But piece by piece, I would work through. But then for like the writing end of it, not the crystal end of it, there are a few things that I find really useful to have around me. One of them is fluorite. We talk about fluorite every week, but one of the things about it is it's a stone of self-discipline, of being able to organize things. It helps us. I often have seen it described as helping order emerge from chaos. And if that doesn't describe what a writer's life is, I can't think of a better analogy. Another one that I work with quite a lot is chrysocolla. So this is my favorite chrysocolla that sits on my desk. It comes from New Mexico. It's got this beautiful quartz drues on top of these little botryoids, or like bubbly shaped bits of chrysocolla. Here I am struggling to find the camera. And I keep this here because it is a stone for me of finding the inner muse. It is a complex copper silicate mineral, or
Mhm.
mineral, depending on how you ask. The IMA kind of has gone back and forth a few times. The International Mineralogical Association has gone back and forth on its definition, but it helps me connect the dots and find the voice that I need to put forward.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's a particularly beautiful piece that you have there too, by the way. I'm ogling it from California
Yeah,
over here.
small but
Wonderful.
mighty.
Yeah.
That's,
No, that's
oh,
gorgeous. That was a beautiful piece.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All of the same. I mean, because we do have different stones that work with different things, right? So, and again, we're all different. So for me, I love that we talk about fluorite so often because I've worked with fluorite forever, but I've always used it in a very soft, gentle kind of way. Like for healing, I often, if we have people coming in, working, if there's anything like cancer or if there's blood stuff, we always say, hey, work with fluorite and it, while you're going through whatever your treatments are, is it's really, really good at helping things on like the cellular level. Now, that's all new age mumbo jumbo, but it it it's been the evidence. It's been the example over and over and over again in my life when it comes to crystal healing that fluoride is so good at helping with a lot of that. It gets down to the very, very base of the body, and it helps to regenerate and regrow, and it's just a fantastic, fantastic stone for that. So when you're talking about using it in this way for like, organizing your thoughts and bringing organization from the chaos, that's exciting to me, because that's just not something that I've done, right? And so it's usually I think of fluoride as because it's a soft stone. So in my head, if it's a super soft stone, then probably it's going to be more on the gentle side. And so that's I've always just used it as a very gentle kind of energy buffy kind of thing. But then you see these pieces where the color is so intense and the energy coming off of them is so intense that there's no way you could just go, oh, fluorite's a passive stone. Like there's obviously a lot of projective things going on with that. So I love when you talk about it, because it's like all these things that I'm like, oh, I never really do that. So I love when you talk about fluorite. Anywho, so for writing and things like that, it really depends on who you are. And I would say if you're somebody who's wanting to write a book, or if you're starting that process, then you should definitely ask your crystal allies, like, who wants to work with me on this project? Because chances are somebody you wouldn't even have considered is going to pop out and be like, hey, bro, so there's that. I just want to give out some love to people who have joined us. Hi, Gene King. Hello, Chase. Chase is a good friend. And Roger. Hello, Roger. Roger, all the way from Texas. So we've got a fun day ahead talking about selenite, which is not fluorite. We've been talking about fluorite. But selenite is a stone that we both love. We both have a very deep relationship with selenite. It's also a stone that a lot of people have a deep relationship with. It's inexpensive to find, which is great. I'm gonna put a picture up here, but it's inexpensive to find, and it's one of these that it's so eager to work with us, especially if you are a psychic person, if you are a magical person. Selenite really, really, really wants to be here and be part of your practice, and that is something that is exciting to me, because it kind of jumps off the shelf almost every single time. Hey, let me be part of your meditation. Hey, let me be part of this ritual cleansing that you're doing. It's a fantastic stone. It's also a stone that not everyone, but a lot of people say is self-cleansing. So I want to talk to you about selenite. I want to talk to you about self-cleansing stones. I want to hear your thoughts on self-cleansing stones, because I have many thoughts on self-cleansing stones after owning a very long-running crystal shop. And so selenite, Nicholas, selenite. So let's start with the first part. So I'm going to put up a picture.
Yeah.
And let's break this down real quick. So this is a desert rose, right?
Yes.
It's very prettiful, and this is also desert rose.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same thing, but they're not the same thing. So let's talk about the difference between gypsum and selenite.
Yeah. So to understand this, we have to look to the list of valid mineral species names, and this doesn't always make sense when we come from the crystal end of things, trying to come toward the mineralogical side of things. But the definition of a discrete mineral species is something that has a unique chemical composition belonging to one of the discrete crystal systems, or 7 kind of geometrical families that we use to describe them. They have to be inorganic and naturally occurring. So it's got to not match something else and have its own stuff and show up in nature without any help, mostly. And the thing about selenite is that selenite is not a valid mineral species. Selenite is a long-standing trade name that is applied to gem quality gypsum. And originally, and this has changed especially in the last couple decades, but even probably 70s and 80s, this began to shift. The only things that we could call selenite from the gypsum group were things that were water clear and transparent. So, if we look at something like this piece that I've got from Utah, or this one from Ontario, we would consider these by the original definitions as being selenite, versus what we just saw on the screen there, or something like this, we would call gypsum. So gypsum is the mineral species, and selenite is the trade name for a variety of it. So, proper nomenclature would be gypsum, VAR period, short for variety or varietal selenite. So this is gypsum varietal selenite, just like you have quartz varietal carnelian, or quartz varietal jasper or amethyst, insert any trade name here. So when it comes to these desert roses, like the examples that you had on the screen, neither is particularly gemmy. These, if we could magnify, I know this material really well, it comes out of Morocco, and if we were to magnify and look in between the kind of white edges, you'd see there's some transparency under there. And then the other one, which has that kind of earthy appearance all the way through, They're both chemically identical. They're both gypsum. Gypsum is calcium sulfate with water in it. So it's a hydrous calcium sulfate. It's a monoclinic mineral. It's very soft. It's only a 2 on the scale of hardness. But the presence or absence of other stuff gives us the range of colors and textures that we see. The main difference between those 2 varieties of desert rose that we saw, the ones with the white edges, they went into an oven. And that dehydrates the edges. And technically, here's what we don't see in crystal books. The edges of this are no longer gypsum. They're actually anhydrite because they've been dehydrated. But that's a man-assisted change in chemistry.
Mm-hmm. So okay, yeah, yep. So when we had the shop, we'd have people come in. They'd want the desert roses because they're pretty, right? And they are great gifts. Like they're actually of all the stones in the world, like giving somebody a desert rose is a wonderful gift. That's a wonderful energy exchange. So people come in and get them, and it was always selenite, and then one day they showed up as gypsum. And we got into this very big discussion over selenite versus gypsum. And I was like, well, it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing. And people very much would hold up this two. We had the game of let's hold them both and let's figure out the vibe. And there was a different vibe off of the white one. And it has to be that anhydrite fun stuff that's going on the tips, in my opinion, because that would be enough to alter the way that the frequency is being transmitted. But that was always a fun, like, and difficult thing to talk to people about, because it's like, no, it's the same thing. No, this isn't what I got at a festival, or no, I'm like, no, it's. So that's interesting. So do you find that there is an energetic vibrational difference between the two, like those two examples of desert rose?
A mild one. I mean, the dehydration is not massive. It's not a huge change from one to another. It's just enough to kind of whiten the appearance. But here's the thing: you can have like proper selenite, in other words, gemmy, lustrous crystals that are desert roses. You can also have desert roses made out of other materials. There are barite roses that are common in parts of the U.S. and other parts of the world. You can find that sort of rosette shape in things like hematite, where they're known as iron roses. So
those are really pretty.
They are. So,
yeah.
But what we usually refer to as a desert rose is the mineral species gypsum, and it may or may not be the varietal of that species known as selenite. But here's the thing. Devin knows this about me. I'm a stickler for accurate nomenclature, especially when a shift in nomenclature affects the monetary value of things. A rock that until recently was not considered selenite. Are you ready? I'm sure we've all seen this. This by original definitions is not selenite. And we've got some slides of this if you want to pop one up there. This is what we call satin spar, because spar just means a lustrous mineral, and satin in reference to that kind of fibrous, satiny appearance. We cannot see discrete crystals with the naked eye. They're not euhedral or well-formed crystals. It's not transparent, it's translucent. So this would not meet the parameters for selenite by the earlier definitions of that term. However, calling it satin spar gypsum versus satin spar selenite doesn't significantly change market value. So I feel like this is a battle nobody needs to fight. It's nice to know, but like the Committee for New Minerals, Names, and Classification is not going to knock on your door if you call this gypsum, satin spar, or selenite. At the end of the day, they're all three kind of right.
Yeah, absolutely. So all right, so we had, you showed us those examples of those more glassy type selenites, and those are what I was more familiar with. And those are great to work with. They have some optical stuff that they do, and it's a really fun, like, you have like to get to talk about the magic parts of everything. If you've got like truth revealing stuff that you need to do, truth spells, it's really good to help reveal the hidden things in places. And I find that to be a particularly good stone to work with for astral travel and for bringing the mind into focus, things like that. So that type of selenite, where it's very dense, it's clear, And it has it's not flaky, right? So like the others, the satin stuff is very flaky. You can't get it wet. I mean, you really shouldn't get it wet anyway, but you can't really get it wet, especially that stuff. Although I will say, if you do have one of those, and whether it's an egg or anything like that, and it does get a little scratchy, you can put a little water in your finger and buff it out pretty quick. But anyway, that being said, so we got these two. What's the energetic difference between that denser, clearer form of selenite and, let's say, a rose versus that satiny kind?
Yeah, so let's compare the physical nature of it. Here we've got something that has a discrete crystal with a termination. This one's fun because that has a little phantom down here. So the crystal, you can kind of see the outline of what it used to look like. This material comes out of Utah, but it clearly has a directionality to it because it has that nice little bit of a termination left intact. You might get some twinned ones where we get terminations growing on either side. These are sometimes known as angel wing selenite or fishtail selenite for their resemblance to those objects. But when we have that kind of crystallinity, there is a more laser-like focus. There's clearly a different kind of relationship with light, since light actually passes through it all the way. When we have our rosettes, especially the very earthy ones, they do feel grounded. They've got bits of clay or sand or other fragments of the earth inside them. They're going to be, we're going to say, less luminous on the one hand, but that's not a read. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes we got to be in our bodies, not out in the ethers. And then when we look at satin spar, it has a totally different relationship to light. It's naturally fiber optic. So, these look great on an LED light base. You pop them on and whatever color shining through them, the whole crystal appears to transmit that color. I think of them as really good for connection on the etheric or psychic level because they kind of help transmit light from point A to point B. And they do so without an incredible loss of integrity of that light. They do manage to maintain and convey it pretty darn well all the way through, but it is softer. And because it is physically porous, it's also energetically porous. This piece that I've got is kind of stained yellow-green because I wrapped it up in tissue paper once for a workshop, and Florida is humid. Just the moisture in the air plus that tissue paper was enough to stain this forever. Yeah, there's this interesting belief about selenite and its we'll say relationship with cleansing and energy, which you've already alluded to, and we'll probably talk on that a little bit more. But my experience is the porosity of this actually requires more frequent cleansing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that because that's one of my pet peeves. So self-cleansing stones. I have thoughts and feels about this. So let's take a step back. And I know we went into this in our Crystal Magic Intensive, and we will go over it again and again and again. So we have this idea, and I think honestly, it just comes. I'm going to sound a little bit cocky when I say this, and I am allowed to because it's our show. So, all right. So here's my thing. So I feel like people get lazy. I just feel like people get lazy, and I feel like they forget the aspects of the work that we do that are inconvenient. So, for example, crystal cleansing, crystal programming. We're dealing with a crystal that actually has its own vibration. It has its own story. It has its own life. And we tend to forget that. So when we add them to our practices, we just assume that whatever we program them to do, or whatever vibe check we're giving them is the way it's going to be. And that's just not the case. So you have a crystal like selenite, which is not self-cleansing. It is not self-cleansing. And we know this. I know this from like personal experience. I know this from working with some really incredible crystal people who all say, no, it's not really a self-cleansing stone. So this idea of a self-cleansing stone is that a stone can interact with some sort of negativity or something, and then it will basically reprogram itself to be cleansed or rid of that particular vibe or energy. And my thing is, I mean, that will happen over time, I think, with just about every stone, right? Like it will reset it because its natural vibration is going to be stronger than whatever, we can program. And if you're not reprogramming over and over and over again, then it eventually will reset. However, it doesn't make it self-cleansing, right? So let's talk about what that's supposed to mean, Nicholas. So what are all the new agey people talking about with the self-cleansing stone business?
Yeah, so we have to kind of unpack the history of this idea, and I'm going to do
Hmm.
so as succinctly as possible.
Put on
When
your thinking caps, folks. We're going on a trip.
Yeah. So there are a couple of, we'll say, really influential works that came out in the early 90s that described a very short list of crystals that the author asserted never needed to be cleansed or cleared. And if you had an interaction with this author face to face and asked her what she meant by that, her experience was in working with those stones, they just didn't hold on to negativity. That is not to say that they had, special programming, that they were, um, self-cleansing, just that they didn't seem to hold on to that in her practice. And that's what she was trying to get across. Now, over the years, when she put out subsequent volumes, her list grew from 2 stones, citrine and kyanite, to like more than 24, I think, by the last volume. And my personal takeaway from reading these works is not that you should never put in the effort, just that these things don't have a particular affinity for. They're not particularly in resonance with holding on to the least pleasant bits of human experience. That doesn't mean cleansing is irrelevant or unhelpful, just that that specific aspect of cleansing, they seem to not need the same way other crystals do. Now, in the internet age, when we have a wonderful game of telephone that is the whole world, that list has grown and changed quite a lot. And so now you find these lists of crystals that never need cleansing or clearing, or that can cleanse themselves, that don't resemble the ones put out in that early literature. So, selenite is one of those that the internet has added, but you don't find on any of those original lists. Hematite is another one that I see frequently cited that doesn't appear on any of those lists. And for me, the question is always, what is the underlying principle? What is the mechanic that is responsible for cleansing or not cleansing? And for me, it's the memory that crystals have. One of the fundamental things that all crystal structures do is they have memory. They record things. So what is it about, let's arbitrarily go back to that original list, what is it about citrine that makes it so drastically, radically, magically different from every other variety of quartz that it no longer needs cleansing or clearing? And honestly, I can't think of a single thing. If we have the heat-treated varieties, it's a few stray molecules of iron. If it's the natural varieties, then it's, iron hydrates or iron oxides, or more likely in some of the nice Brazilian stuff that we see, lithium and aluminum ions that'll be present. And those same things are present in other forms of quartz. Why is it only here that they never need cleansing or clearing? And I don't think, for me, that's how crystal energy works. They're not sitting there judging, oh, I'm going to remember this, but not this. And I'll hold on to this, but we're going to throw that one out. They are much less choosy than we are. And they're also much less personal.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say they can't have personality interfacing with us, but they don't take things personally the way humans do.
Right.
And it's not until around maybe the mid-90s that we really start people suggesting that you use selenite to cleanse other crystals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I know how we got there. And it's an unrelated thing. And it comes to an early attempt at looking at what it's made out of and how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a fairly high proportion of water in its chemical formula. There's 2 water molecules inside every molecule of it. And that's a fairly high amount for a relatively simple crystal structure. And water, anyone who practices in magical and spiritual traditions will know, is often used for cleansing. Water can represent the movement of things when they're stuck. And some of the earliest modern literature that we've got on crystal healing suggests that this is really good for stuck emotional states, stuck mental patterns, stuck situations in your life, returning them to a state of movement. So naturally, if it's going to get stuck things moving again, we could use that when we want to cleanse the energy of something. But it's a lot like how we might use a sponge to wash this stubborn stuff at the bottom of our pan. If I never wash that sponge, no other dish will ever be clean again.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not cleansing this selenite, and then I go to cleanse another crystal, then another crystal, and another crystal, um, especially if I'm not giving that selenite time to metabolize its own stuff, like all things do,
Mm-hmm.
then we don't have very good spiritual hygiene anymore.
Boom. Boom. Bingo. Exactly. I get the, because I remember back in the day that there were books where selenite was listed as like elementally corresponding with water. And the joke was always, well, don't put it in water, but yet it's a water stone. So we always had all these jokes about it, but that makes sense as to why. I never sat down to look at the composition, but that's like, to me, that really is like when I sit down to try to figure things out, I look at the composition and then try to go off of that. We've had those conversations many times. So with that being said, I'm it annoys me because I just don't like, I don't see how, like, again, like with citrine, okay, so yeah, there might be some iron in it, and that's what's causing that color, and that can absolutely have that effect on energy of wiping things out and cleansing things out. But we know that there are so many other stones, even in the quartz family, that have so much more iron, that is available, that it doesn't make sense why that would be a self-cleansing stone, but these wouldn't be. And that's the stuff that it's a pet peeve, but because none of it makes sense. Like there's no A plus B equals C going on. It's A plus X equals D, and it just is what. So it, like, that's my thing about it, is when you take a step back and you look at what we're really doing and what we're really talking about, it doesn't really add up. I mean, it is very cleansing, right? Like that as a stone, it does push things, it does move things as an ally. But in and of itself, it isn't going to just be cleansed of stuff. Like I know, like it was one of my first stones that I started working with, and I got this pencil. I had a selenite pencil. I was like 18, 19 years old, and I thought I was the shiz, because I got this pencil and we were using it in rituals to cast circles and do all kinds of great stuff. And I let somebody borrow it because they were having some sort of thing going on. And this person was like, right? And so when I got it back, the stone felt like the light had been just taken out of it. Like it was that. And it was like, okay, what do you want me to do? And it was like, okay, just basically snap me in half, put me back in the earth, let me do my thing. And I'm like, all right. So I did that and released it of whatever the programming and things was, did a cleansing on it, put it back in. But it was such a clear, something was taken from the stone thing, that it was like a husk of what a crystal should be, is what it felt like. And so that being one of my first experiences as a witch, going and working with selenite in a really active way, and coming back and being like, there's no way that this is a self-cleansing stone, because like whatever, like something happened to the stone, it was violated, and it has not cleansed itself from that violation. And so that is the thing that has always stuck with me from like being a little witchlet all the way on, was no, there was definitely something that happened to this stone. And it's hard to talk about that kind of stuff with people, because we do have this notion that like all selenite is selenite, and we can just connect to it. And even though we have these tiny pieces of it, we're still connecting to a bigger thing. And that's true in a very grand sense, in the scheme of things, it's true. But we're also dealing with these individual specimens with their individual personalities and their individual modes, right? Like we're all different people. It's kind of like that. So that's the way I treat them. And so to have that experience where it felt like that light was taken from it, or something had been shifted inside of that specimen, was very, very eerie. And it's something that, to me, gave me that check mark to be like, there's something going on here. Let's pay closer attention. So that's one of those early memories that has just stuck with me for like over, almost 20 years, that selenite did not cleanse itself. And so books are lying. So let's talk. So Melody is the person who wrote about this. And I'm so glad that you talked about where Melody was coming from with it, because Melody was not speaking the same language that like witches are speaking. And so, and I think that's the other thing that's going on, is that there's stuff getting lost in translation. Right.
Right. She was coming from a place of UPG, in an era where we didn't use that term whatsoever.
Right.
And UPG doesn't mean invalid. It means it was her personal experience. And that was absolutely great for her personal experience. I've never had that vibe with citrine. I have a similar vibe to her with kyanite. I feel like maybe I can be a little fast and loose with my kyanite cleansing for myself. But if I'm going to be seeing clients, I'm going to have great, impeccable spiritual hygiene for their benefit. But there was nothing about citrine that felt like it never needed cleansing or clearing to me. So we have to consider like how different spiritual paradigms influence what we're doing. The words like charge have different meanings than they used to. How a witch used that word in the 1970s looks very different to how a lot of crystal healers use it on the internet here in 2023. And I'm not saying I agree with the crystal healers on the internet in 2023, but I recognize that's how they use the word, and I respect their right to use it that way. So
Absolutely.
you're totally spot on this idea that we have different modalities that might have similar terminology, but they don't always mean the same thing. We run into this problem in occultism all the time when we talk about things like angels, demons, the Nephilim. Like, we don't mean the same thing all the time when we use those terms. And you got to know someone's framework. Even the word chakra doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. If I'm coming from a Vedic, historically informed perspective, a chakra is not an energy center. It never will be. That is not the role of a chakra. But if I'm coming from modern metaphysical milieu in this millennium, that's pretty much all anyone means. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Language matters. Well, language matters, and it's really hard sometimes to understand that we're not speaking the same language. And so, and this is so clear in the crystal stuff, because we are dealing with other people's gnosis. And like with you and me, like when we sit down to write a book like this, it's obviously a lot of research, and there's a lot of going, especially for you, and there's a lot of going into the science of it and things like that, and then allowing our gnosis to spring forth from that. But we're still writing about gnosis. We're still writing about our vibes and our feels and our experiences and things like that. And it's really important that everybody remembers that. Like, just period. Like, we have to remember that when we're reading other people's books. It goes into how we form our thoughts and feels and philosophies, right? And so it's difficult. It's difficult, especially coming from a new age world to a witchy world, because they're different things. We're going about, we're all heading up the same mountain. I believe that, but we have a very different view in witchcraft about how energy works and the way things connect and so on and so forth. So that's a big one. Yeah. It's a sticky thing.
And I would honestly say my experience with occult spaces is where there's room for discussion, where there is room for discussion about UPG, there's a lot more grace. We can recognize something is not holy writ and universal as long as we label it UPG. But in the crystal world, well, this book said it, that blog said it, I found it in a meme. So therefore it is true. And there's no discussion of UPG in the kind of overarching community. Are there pockets of it? Are there people talking about it? Obviously we are right now, and we are reflecting conversations that are taking place, but they're not the dominant narrative. So I think that is something that maybe more metaphysical, new agey, woo-woo, which is not a bad term, I'm very woo, spaces can maybe take a page out of the occult and witchy communities. We can all learn from one another. And that idea, that notion of things being personal gnosis, and unverifiable at that. Like, you're going to have something that sounds different than me, and that's cool. And they're going to enrich one another, even if they disagree.
Right. Even if they disagree. And that's a really important thing to remember, even if they disagree. Okay. So selenite, did we cover all the bases with selenite?
I think people know its general properties really well, that we probably don't have to go much into it. There are lots of flavors and colors and shapes out there. I pulled just a couple other weird ones that I didn't think people would know super well.
Take a look.
So I've got this beautiful kind of double blade shaped crystal. This comes from Texas and is strongly fluorescent. It's golden in color. My favorite variety is called a ram's horn selenite. My biggest one doesn't curl very much, but these are usually fibrous and they coil. Some of them make perfect spirals. I have a teeny one that wouldn't look great on camera. The genesis of these is still not super well understood, but as this is crystallizing out of its solution, the movement of that liquid changes direction. That much we're relatively certain of, but there could be other features present. So, the water's flowing in different directions as it forms. And then the newest variety of selenite or gypsum in my collection comes from England, because that's what I'm a giant nerd about. And they call it daisy bed gypsum because it looks like little flowers in a bed of gypsum rock. So
It's super cute.
yeah. And I think those are from Gloucestershire, but memory is a little fuzzy, so I'm going to have to look that one up.
That's super cute. I have not seen a ram's horn selenite in person yet. That's still like one of my like gems that I have to find out in the world. Because I'm terrified of trying to order one because I just know it's going to arrive like shattered. But I would love to see one in person and then take it home because they look so cool. And it's one of those damn nature, you crazy kind of things, like it's a neat thing. It's a neat whenever crystals grow in a
Yeah.
swirly pattern period, like that's always really cool. But there's something just extra special about the ramshorn selenite that I would love to get my hands on, and I couldn't find a good picture of one that I could yank easily, so that's why we didn't. But I'm really glad that you showed it because that was one that I've been
Well, if you come to Central
waiting.
Florida, we'll go to my old university, the Stomping Grounds. I'm sure they still have one on display in the museum I worked in. If not, I'll message ahead of time and see if Dr. Cole can get one out for us.
So cool. That's so cool. So let's talk real quick the relationship, because this comes up too, but the relationship between like selenite and calcite. They often look a lot alike, especially when they're ultra clear. We have oftentimes, I know I've gone into stores and I've seen like big thick chunks of selenite being sold as calcites and things like that. Is there any, from that chemical composition kind of standpoint, is there any relationship there, or is this purely the habits are similar and they look a lot alike? Is that what's going on there?
I mean, they both have calcium in them, but that's about where the similarity ends. Lots of things have calcium in them that are completely unrelated. So uh, I think I think when we look at the really gemmy prismatic forms of gypsum, whether we call them selenite or not, they can look kind of rhombic in nature because they're monoclinic minerals. So they are made out of these kind of parallel faces, but they don't have the same cleavage that calcite does. They're obviously much softer. Calcite is a 3 on the hardness scale and selenite a 2, but we have to remember these are relative rankings and not absolute values. So you can scratch one with your finger, but not the other, because your fingernail is considered arbitrarily a 2.5. And the other thing is if you have a transparent piece, like really gemmy, any color, but when we look at a gemmy piece of gypsum or selenite, there's no real strong birefringence or double refraction. And you'll definitely see that in calcite. So, if you lay it on top of something and you see 2 of something through it, it's not selenite.
Bingo. Yeah, that's the tell, everyone. So double check that. And what I would tell everyone to do is grab it, put it over like a book or something where you can just see the letters pop through, and that'll tell you what's going on. That's the easy way to do it. Okay, so there is a question, and usually I'd be like, meh, but this one's a good question. This is from Gene Kring, and this is just to clarify some things. I'm going to pop it up here. Can you explain the differences between how witchy energy and new age energy are felt? So the truth is, it's the same thing. We're feeling the same thing. We're just saying it's something different, and that's I think that's what we were getting at, right?
Yeah, so I think the experience of energy is weirdly both universal in that we can all experience it, and then personal. So it's filtered through our own individual biases. But the difference here is how the kinds of terminology we use to explain those experiences. So in new agey metaphysical world, we often couch things in very pseudoscientific terms. Even what I do with crystals using a scientific model is pseudoscientific because I can't prove it, I can't measure it, I can't repeat it in a discrete way that science will think is compliant. Whereas in the witchy side of things, where we tend to be very happy to leave things at the abstract and symbolic. Can they be left that way in the new age world? Yes, and they frequently are, but the kinds of symbols we use tend to differ.
Well, it does seem to be that in the new age, world, there's more of an attempt to bridge science and spirituality, whereas in the occult, we tend to just accept that there's things that science isn't going to be able to touch, and that's okay, and we just kind of move forward with that. Um, but I do know that, and that's one of the things that I like the most about the New Age community, and I like being part. Like I consider myself part of the New Age community, is because there is an attempt. It's at least an attempt, right, to bridge those two worlds, and that's exciting. There's a lot of pseudoscience, especially when it comes to crystals. And you and we should do an episode just on debunking the pseudo. Maybe 5 episodes, because that's like a thing. But you and I, but like that's one of the bonding moments with Nicholas was us just over the pseudoscience stuff. So we should totally talk about that on an episode, because that's like a whole thing. But we really get it with, like, there's so much of it, especially when we talk about these types of stones and selenites and things like that. Like there's so much fakery and just BS, and it. My thing is, even if it's all feels, even if we're basing everything off of feels, which I'm okay with, I'm totally okay with, there still has to be a science to it. Like there still has to be patterns. There still has to be something that you can trace backwards and then redo and try to get a result. Like that's still part of making sense of everything. And you can still be a very spiritual person, very active and a live wire, still be logical at the same time. And that's the stuff that to me really matters. Like that's fine that you have this vibe about the stone and it's great. I don't care. I don't care if selenite came down and told you that it was going to be the key to unlocking the next Antichrist or something. Like, and that's fine. If that's what selenite told you, that's great. But that's on you, right? that is now your recipe. That is not selenite's recipe, right? And that's a really kind of important thing. So we tend to grab these, like, all this pseudoscience. We really do need to do an episode, because I have like 15 examples swirling in my head, but we don't need to get into it. But while we're on the topic, let's get into a little bit. So are there things about selenite that you want to debunk, or something that you feel is like a pet peeve of yours when it comes to this particular stone? I saw your eyes.
Yes. So we
yes,
we already touched on the big one, which is about its energy, but there's something about the materiality of selenite, its physical constitution, that I would love to debunk. Your selenite will not dissolve in water. Your selenite will not dissolve in water at normal temperatures and pressures. We have to throw that in there because it's formed by evaporation or by hydrothermal activity. So, water is involved in its makeup, but not under the same circumstances as your water tends to exist in everyday life. So if you have a nice gemmy piece of selenite like this, I have news for you. If you've ever gotten any of this Utah selenite in particular, which is really popular on the market, almost all of it gets washed off either in high-powered hose kind of situations, or I know some folks who do the mining and digging and take it out into rivers to lovingly wash it and make sure everyone is freed up from all this clay stuff. And they arrive intact. They do not disappear in the water. Now, something fibrous like satin spar selenite, over time, this is not soluble, but it is friable. So the little fibers of it can get super saturated with water and begin to flake off, and you might not see it breaking apart fiber by fiber. But that is not the same as being soluble. So yeah, you're at normal temperatures and pressures, your selenite will not dissolve. It's not going to happen. Can it be damaged by water? Yes. The mineral content of your water, the acidity of your water can eat away at the surface of something if it's been polished. And then again, if it's satin spar, you're going to ruin that finish if water gets in between those fibers.
Yeah.
But it's not.
I got into it. This is one of my memories, one of my core memories of Facebook, was getting into it with somebody over this, because I had posted that something along the lines of like you shouldn't put selenite in your bra when you're at a festival, because it'll break apart and you'll get a rash. Because I've seen it. Excuse me. I've seen it like 15 times. And somebody was very like angry, and I got hate mail, and they worked at a shop and was like, how the fuck am I supposed to sell your book if you don't even know what the fuck you're talking about? It was like a whole thing. It was like, whoa. First of all, I didn't say it would dissolve in water. Sweat is not water. That is very different. There's a whole lot of stuff going on with sweat, like salts and oils and other things. But even more so, like I've seen it with my own eyes. This poor woman put selenite in her bra in her goddess pocket, and then she had this horrible rash that developed after it because that's not what it's supposed to do. And that was literally the comment. And it was a whole thing. So it doesn't dissolve in water, although I have had experiences where somebody bought a selenite bowl and they put it in the dishwasher, and then it wasn't there when they opened the dishwasher. And that was stupid because it was like high heat, high pressure, detergent, like all of that stuff is going to break down something like that. And then we did put a piece of selenite. I didn't, somebody did, put a piece of selenite in a fish tank. And about 3 days later, there was this little, it looked like salt in the water. It's like, you can see where salt's in water, and like a little bit of that going on. And there was a little trail of like a bubble every once in a while going up. And I was like, that's not good. So we pulled it out. So there is some sort of relationship that goes on. I can see why people would be like, it's dissolving in water. Like, I get it. There is a thing that happens, but it isn't dissolving. That isn't happening. It isn't going back into, yeah.
And, just to remind people, we often talk about crystals in the abstract in terms like perfect, homogeneous, and we use these terms that come from science that describe their materiality, but the abstract and the actual are seldom the same. If something like this satin spar is forming when large deposits of ancient shallow seawater, which is saline, is full of salts, is evaporating and leaving stuff behind, hydrous calcium phosphate is not the only substance it is likely to leave behind. There are lots of other things that could be mixed into the fold of this, and we don't bother identifying them because it's mostly gypsum. But there can be other things in there that could react to your water, could react to other things. So even if selenite itself is not soluble and you have a great big mass of it like this and you put it in water, then maybe that other stuff could react with the water. That could cause it to crack, to splinter, to discolor. There's so many things can happen. And I love that Roger's talking about this experiment that he did and showed it on TikTok where he put a piece in water and it's still there 2 years later in the same water bottle. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not encouraging us all to go dip our selenite in water. Please don't,
No.
especially if it's the fibrous variety. But if your nice gemmy pieces get a little wet, don't panic. Just dry them off.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, that was a good little deep dive into selenite. I think it is time. I think it is that time. Although I'm not as prepared, but we're gonna hit anyway.
We'll live.
It is time for crystal remedies. So just a reminder, we aren't doctors. Don't treat us like we are. And boom. Okay, so this is the fun part of the show where we list off a few things and we prescribe a crystal remedy for that thing. So the very first one today is going to be to get up on time. So you are oversleeping. What do you do? What crystal are we working with?
Sunstone.
Mm-hmm. Sunstone. Yep. Sunstone. Now, why? Why sunstone, Nicholas?
So the feldspar family is good for rhythms, cycles, sequences is a good maybe word to use.
Yeah.
And it's got that kind of solar vibe. I'm going to conquer the day. It makes it feel like maybe getting up is worth something while you're setting that habit, that sequence of waking up on time.
Absolutely. Sunstone is exactly what I tell people to use. Okay, so the next thing is going to be that you are somebody who has acid problems. So tummy stuff, and you're not allowed to say citrine.
Oh, easy. So we're going to go with carbonate minerals broadly, but calcite is the most common one that we're going to experience. Mm-hmm. And it's because they have a special relationship with acid. They actually effervesce. And if you consume tablets, antacid tablets, there's a good chance you're consuming calcite in them, depending on the brand.
That was fun. That was a fun discovery. And not all brands do it. Like it's a whole thing, but Yeah, and you have to the chemical, because they don't just say it's like the stones in there, but it's the breakdown. And that was fun. So have you done the thing where you like enchant and charge your medications and your things that have minerals in them, and then before you take them?
Yeah, and even the ones that are not mineral based, I do anyway. Sometimes more regularly than others.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I feel you on that. Okay, so you are nervous about talking to your boss.
Oh, I'm tempted to say sunstone again, but we're gonna branch out. We're gonna do something different, and I'm going to say aquamarine on this. I have a
Mm.
particular piece of aquamarine that I would use that is from the Orongo Mountains in Namibia. That is aqua and black tourmaline together, and
Hmm.
that combo, to paraphrase from Audre Lorde, feels like the ability to speak truth to power. You got to
Mm.
tell it like it is. You put your whole heart out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say topaz. Yeah, that's
Mm.
really trippy. Beautiful, beautiful. I like that. Okay, the next one is you have a hard time staying on task, so you're like not completing deadlines and things like that. Bum, ba, bum.
All right. It's
All
always the
right.
answer. But when that fails, I will use black onyx because it is just so grounding. I don't like wearing it for long periods of time, but if I just have to stay on task, it's black onyx.
Hmm. Okay, so to help shut down like chaos in an environment, like let's say like a job. So you're in a new job and you want to be discreet and you want to put some crystals around. What crystal are you picking?
Hmm. Obsidian could be good because it's insulative.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I might also be tempted to say something like hematite because it's reflective and maybe even deflective a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think it is about? So hematite, we should do it. We're going to do an episode. We're going to do an episode on hematite one of these days because hematite is a fascinating mineral, and it shows up in a lot of other beautiful crystals, and so it's this fantastic thing. But when you're so okay, so we're there at the new job site. I think hematite's great, especially if it's a chaotic environment or something like that. But let's say it's a lethargic environment. It's not very active. Things aren't getting done. What would you what would you use?
So I don't want to give something away about our hematite episode, but it is an iron oxide, and iron can be stimulating in some people. For example, I
Mhm,
cannot sleep as effectively if hematite is near my face.
mhm,
Uh, but that doesn't universally help. The literature tends to say that hematite's really good for insomnia, unless you work like I do. But if I wanted to maybe overcome some inertia, then I would do carnelian, which is
mm,
calcite or agate with small amounts of hematite in it, and it's
I like
very
that.
invigorating.
I like that. I would say ocean jasper,
Okay.
um, but yeah, I like where you went with it. I totally agree with it. I like ocean jasper because it's good for bringing things together, letting there be opportunities that spring into action, things like that, helping you see opportunities for organization and for organization in general. It's a fantastic stone. I think we did an episode where we went into like that like intently, or I could be thinking of a class we did. I don't know. We've talked about that before. I'm sure there will be a Jasper episode because Jasper is a huge and confusing family, and so there's a lot of like we'll get into it because I was going to get into a whole thing. We're not going to. All right. The last question is, you are somebody who is having a difficult time with making new friends.
Hmm.
So say you're an adult because it's hard for adults to make friends. You
Yes.
move to a new place, you don't know anybody. What crystal are you working with to make friends and things like that?
There's some medieval lore that suggests that turquoise has been used as a talisman for friendship.
Hmm.
One old bit of lore that we see originating in the Middle East and kind of spreading out into Western Europe um, talks about catching the reflection of the new moon on a polished surface of turquoise. Some sources, some versions of this ritual use it to invite friendship, others for other purposes. But I think that like new beginning kind of. I was thinking more like protection, warding off evil. It does a little bit of everything, I suppose. Um, but that's one, and another one that I always like turning to that I think is super undervalued is hiddenite or green spodumene because it's
Yes.
one of love and appreciation. And You know, I think it's a good talisman, a good representative stone of friendship, because it should be built on things like reciprocal love and
Mhm.
appreciation.
Absolutely, 1000%. I would say like honey calcite,
That's
because yeah, it's good to sweeten people up and things like that. Okay, so yeah, that just about does it for this episode, and we've got so in another 2 weeks we'll be back with another episode. Maybe we'll do hematite next time because that's or even jaspers or whatever. You tell us in the comments below what you want us to do next time, and we'll do it. Because Nicholas and I can talk about crystals at any point in time for any length of time, and we're perfectly at home, so we can totally do that. But we've got we this was a good episode. We talked about some stuff that I think is going to unfold into some bigger conversations in later episodes, and I particularly enjoy selenite as a magical ally. So to wrap it up, I would say that's for me the reasons that I like selenite the most, like that I go to it, is really that it helps with connection. So when I work with it, that fiber optic, especially the fibrous kind, that fiber opticness that it has going on is very much aligned with things that like we're doing with social media, things that we're doing with the internet. And so I tend to keep it around my router and things like that, and it's all been very good, especially when you're trying to ward off internet BS. So I've found that has been very helpful for things like that. But I particularly enjoy working with that soft fibrous kind, and it's more that I do my high vibe spiritual stuff with the harder, denser, clearer kind. So
Yeah.
I would say that. So if you were to summarize your work with selenite, how would you do that?
Connection is a really good word. I think that we can get both lateral and vertical integration through it. Vertical by communing with higher
Mhm.
self, holy guardian angel, the cosmos, however we want to conceive of that. Um, there's an example of how our witchy and woo-woo terminology is going to differ. It's both pointing us in the same direction, but we're going to describe it as something different.
Mhm.
That's one way. And then on the lateral, it's seeing how you fit in an ecosystem of spirit, because the world around us is enspirited. And I think that this is a stone just so on the cusp of the physical and the metaphysical in the
Mhm.
esoteric meaning of that, that it helps us remember and honor those connections.
Absolutely. I like that. So that's a really wonderful way of putting it. I mean, you must be a writer or something.
Something like
Uh,
that.
All right. So everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week with a bunch of cool, well, not next week, the week after next, with probably hematite, because the chat room's going off about hematite. So we'll probably do hematite next time, which is fantastic. And stay tuned. So Nicholas, right now, if you want to send people to come find out more about you, where are you sending them?
Best place is go check out my freshly updated website, theluminouspearl.com. You can sign up for my patreon.com/theluminouspearl. Find me on social media as at the Luminous Pearl. There's a theme here, so you can track me down.
There you go. All right. And you can just find, if you're interested in me, you just go to modernwitch.com and all the things are there. Yeah. Links and all this stuff. And if you are on Threads, come find me. Are you on Thread yet, Nicholas?
I am, yes.
Yeah. How are you liking the Threads experience?
I can't say I've used it very much yet.
Fair enough. I'm liking it. It's not my Twitter, but it doesn't need to be. So I'm going to RIP Twitter. Live long and prosper, all the nerds who I met and friended there. Anyway, okay. Love you guys. Check us out. You got our website, you've got our books. We are so appreciative that you decided to tune in today, and we will see you on the flip side.